So continuing back on to where I left off from. So my concern is that the phone was with the boat, and I don't know how big this boat is, but generally speaking, on boats, people kind of leave phones in a designated area or where they were seated. But generally speaking, it should be visible. Also, their story is that he wanted to stay with a young lady. Most people would keep their phones, especially if you're going to be left on an island. I think you would want to have your phone with you. Now, even if you follow their story, let's say Nolan forgot about the phone and still decided to leave. The story is you're heading over to you're driving 10 miles to mainland and you realize, Nolan's phone. The first thing a friend would do would most likely return to the island to get his phone. Because since you know that you left him with strangers, there's a possibility he might not be able to get a ride. Now, if you didn't bother to do that, you would think that he would actually believe that no one would be able to get a ride anyways and get his phone at a later time. So let's think about that logically. Now let's look on the other side what's happening on the island. So it turns out Nolan does not have his phone. We would have to believe that everybody on that island also didn't have a phone. We'd also have to believe that if Nolan realizes he doesn't have a phone, that no one on that island was able to lend him a phone so he can make a phone call to his parents, a phone call to his friends. Hey, I can't get a ride. Hey, you guys have my phone. Can you bring it back? Something along those lines. He would attempt to even call his own phone. So no one's really discussing that aspect, but we're going to go with what the narrative is. He wanted to stay with someone. At some point, no one's going to realize he doesn't have a phone. At some point, he's going to try to make a phone call, at least to get his phone. So let's continue on with the thought process. So we're on this island. His friends have already left. Obviously, there's people there, unless he was by himself, but there's people there. People don't just disappear and they just leave all of a sudden. Okay? There's going to be people that are leaving in different stages. So you have Nolan, he's supposedly talking to this young lady he's never met. At some point, she's going to leave. He should have left with her if what they're saying is true. Let's say he didn't get to leave with that individual. Well, there are other boaters there. Are you telling me out of that whole crowd that's there, no one offered to give him a ride to the mainland? I find that kind of strange. They all said, you know what, see you later, Nolan. Good knowing you. Too bad your friends left you, and they boated off. There's absolutely no room. No one called. No one offered to say, hey, do you want me to call a friend to come get you because our boat's full? We're to capacity. No, they all just left, and then he's just there by himself. Then he says, well, my parents are expecting me, or somebody else is expecting me. The best thing for me to do is to swim 10 miles. Okay, so let's think about how long that boat ride is to get there. So they're driving in a boat, and hey, the more time you add to it, the more unlikely Nolan is going to take that ride. So if you think a 10 mile boat ride is 5 minutes, um, then you got to think also as well. Well, if it's so short of a time to get to the mainland to this 10 mile island, which I'm not suggesting, what was the big deal? And once they got to shore and figured out he had his phone to turn around and drive that 15-20 minutes back to the island to make sure no one has his phone, right? So we got to follow through the logic. We can't just go with the narrative that's given by the media and just not think about this practically. So we have to go through the practical thinking. So you got to think, okay, all these things have to be true. So now Nolan's on this island by himself. He waved everybody goodbye. He's just by himself on a deserted island, okay? Then he decides to get in the water and swim 10 miles to mainland. That's the option all those boaters left him with. The last one that left, Nolan, he's just hanging out there, just no phone. And we're supposed to think that he decided to get in the water and drown. All right, because obviously he drowned. I don't think that's what happened at all. My theory is that maybe he did say he wanted to talk to this girl, but I do not believe that he stayed on that island without his phone. I believe he was on that boat. He was on that boat. He got into a scuffle or some kind of argument because they wanted to leave and rain in on the parade when he was making progress with this girl since they weren't getting anywhere. Why you got to stop the party? Blah, blah, blah. You know, I think also there's a dynamic because he's in college, he's playing football, there's the prospects of the NFL. So, you got to think about that high school to college dynamic. And, as people's, successes start to blossom, some friends might have some class issues, jealousy issues, that sort of thing. So, you have to sit there. I think he's having some kind of dispute on a boat, and they push him off. They push him off. Get the off my boat. That's what happened. Get off my boat. Threw him over there. And at that point, they think to themselves, right? There's a cell phone, right? Uh, they might not have identified it at the time. He might have had it on him at the time that he got tossed off, but it's in the boat. So there's one or two possibilities with that, right? The possibility is one, he didn't have the boat. He didn't have the phone on him at the time they got into this scuffle, and he was thrown out. So if he didn't have his phone on him, they might not have realized the phone was there. Even if they did realize the phone was there, the last thing they're going to do is throw it over. And I'll tell you why. Kids today understand, I shouldn't say kids, young people, young adults understand cell phone technology. If they had thrown the cell phone over with him, even without recovering the cell phone, they can still kind of determine what happened. Because what's going to happen is going to show pinging as he's traveling. And then all of a sudden it stops. What that pinging also tells them is how fast he's going from point A to point B. So the technology would determine, like, hey, obviously he's out, 2-3 miles offshore when all of a sudden the signal goes blank. Because when they toss the phone, it's gonna get destroyed, most likely, and they'll lose signal, and the phone will be gone with them. And now it's gonna be harder to make the claim that they're making now, because now we have evidence that his phone traveled this distance, and then all of a sudden, and people, I'm just saying. I'm just saying that's what the possibility is. So when you look at it that way, some smart person thing can be like, we're not going to throw the phone over. We'll keep it on here, and we'll say he left his phone and decided to stay on the island. I think that's what the story they came up with after the fact. If they didn't notice his phone. If they did notice his phone, I still think that they're savvy enough to think, well, if I throw the phone over, it's going to be obvious. So I think that's when they concocted the story. And that's why the phone was returned late. That's why they went off. They talked to their parents and so on and so forth. I think they all thought about it. And, it is what it is. I think that's the story. I really do not believe that Nolan was ever left on that island. And if he was left on that island, it's harder for me to believe out of all the people there, they wouldn't give this guy a ride. And if out of all the people there didn't, if it is true that nobody would give him a ride, that tells you the type of people that are there, and that should also tell you what kind of justice is to come. Because if it's true that they left him there, they brought him there and left him, then and everybody else decided to leave the guy, didn't let him use the phone or contact anybody, that tells you what kind of people live in Mississippi. The other aspect I was looking at is, let's say they left him because he wasn't coming fast enough. Even I think leaving him, knowing that there's no phone, because I'm sure that they would have communicated with each other. If the case is that he's going to get off this boat without his phone, and you were with him and he's your friend, and you all left your phones or whatever the case may be, if you took your phone, why wouldn't he take his phone? So if he didn't take his phone onto this island, I would assume nobody took their phone onto this island. So you would most likely know that he doesn't have his phone. And if you left him like in that position, that's a form of kidnapping. It's false imprisonment. Legally speaking, if you take someone out to a deserted place, drop them off, and drive off, that's false imprisonment. So that's technically a felony. So, a lot of people are like, could you charge somebody with murder? Well, yeah, you can. It's called felony murder. All you have to prove is that he intentionally left him there without a means of escaping that area. So you take the boat and you take his phone. So if you take the boat and you take the phone, that's the felony. If he dies in the process, it's a felony murder. So you can go down for murder one. A clever prosecutor can make that case as it speaks, because the evidence is he went with them and you left with them and you knew you had his phone. They can't deny that they didn't know he had his phone. I'm sure it rang. I'm sure they knew where it was, because they obviously did. So that's my theory. If y'all followed me for a long time, I did the Casey Anthony case. I predicted it was going to be a not guilty. If anybody was following that I was amongst the minority, if not the only one, because it's obvious that Casey Anthony, well, let me rephrase. The evidence showed that she had something to do with the death of her child. And I told you the theory behind, the trunk and everything else. So this is my theory. If I was a prosecutor and I was looking at this case, this is how I would look at it. I would give the benefit of the doubt to the victim. I would look at them as any normal, rational, logical individual. I think it's illogical for me to believe that Nolan decided to stay on an island without his phone. If he knew they were leaving, your senses are to say, hey, where's my phone? They're leaving. That's the first sense. You'd have to give these other friends every benefit of the doubt, and then you'd also have to give no grace to Nolan. You'd have to think he was the stupidest individual alive. And if you believe that story, that's probably how you look at him. He's a dumb guy. He's just an idiot. He just happens to be in college because of, I don't know, DEI or something. He's not educated. He doesn't think for himself. He doesn't know how to ask someone to use their phone. He doesn't know how to wiggle his way onto a boat and make it back to the other side. He's just completely, senseless. That's what you have to think. So that's my story, and hope you enjoy. Stay tuned.